Most Americans think bread is just flour, water, yeast, and salt. But some supermarket loaves contain ingredients that sound more like a chemistry worksheet than a bakery recipe. And here's the twist. An ingredient being legal and regulated by the FDA does not automatically mean the bread is the best choice for everyday eating. Today, we're going inside the labels of 11 popular US bread brands to find out which ones deserve a second look. Before we start, subscribe to Unpoisoned America for more evidence-based food and product investigations. And don't skip ahead, because one of the most famous healthy-looking breads on this list has a label that may surprise you. Number 8. Arnold Country White Bread. Let's start with a bread that looks almost innocent. Arnold Country White Bread is soft, familiar, and marketed around that comforting idea of homemade bread. But turn the bag around, and the first ingredient tells a very different story: enriched wheat flour. That means you're starting with refined wheat flour rather than an intact whole grain. The current ingredient list also includes sugar, soybean oil, natural flavor, wheat gluten, fermented wheat flour, soy lecithin, and citric acid. Now, none of those ingredients individually makes this bread poison. That's not how food science works. The issue is what the entire formulation tells us about the kind of bread we're actually buying. Here's the important distinction. When wheat is refined into white flour, much of the bran and germ are removed. Some vitamins and minerals are then added back through enrichment. That's useful, but enriched flour isn't nutritionally identical to the original whole grain. The Whole Grains Council recommends looking for a whole grain as the first ingredient when you're trying to identify a predominantly whole grain product. Arnold Country White doesn't pass that basic test. And then there's the added sugar and soybean oil. Again, these aren't forbidden ingredients, they're simply clues that this is a highly formulated white sandwich bread, rather than a minimally processed whole grain loaf. So why is Arnold only number 8 instead of number 1? Because compared with some of the breads coming later, its ingredient list is actually relatively restrained. It doesn't rely on the huge collection of dough conditioners found in some ultra-soft commercial breads, and the company says this product is free from artificial preservatives, colors, and flavors. But don't let that sentence fool you into thinking it's automatically a health food. No artificial preservatives and made with real ingredients are not the same thing as whole grain or minimally processed. The better question isn't, does this bread contain something scary? It's, is this the kind of bread I want to eat every day? And for us, there's a better answer coming later. Number 7. Fran's Big Premium White Bread. Number 7 is Fran's Big Premium White Bread. And this one demonstrates why the words premium and white bread shouldn't automatically be interpreted as healthy. Fran's current label begins with enriched unbleached wheat flour, followed by water, sugar, and yeast. Then things get more complicated. Soybean oil, ammonium sulfate as a yeast nutrient, dough conditioners including sodium stearoyl lactylate and ascorbic acid, calcium propionate, calcium sulfate, and enzymes. The loaf does have one advantage over some competitors. The current Big White formula does not use high fructose corn syrup, but removing one controversial ingredient doesn't transform refined white bread into whole grain bread. And here's where the FDA part matters. People sometimes see an ingredient with a scientific-sounding name and assume that the FDA must have somehow declared the entire food healthy, or that the ingredient is automatically dangerous. Neither conclusion is correct. The FDA regulates food additives and requires approved additives to be used appropriately. Some substances are also recognized as safe under specific conditions. So when we call a bread a product to avoid, we're not claiming that the FDA has declared it toxic. We're evaluating the formulation from a consumer perspective. Refined flour first, added sugar, added oil, dough conditioners, and preservatives designed to produce a soft, stable, long-lasting commercial loaf. And there's another reason to pay attention to the label. Fran's packaging also carries a California Proposition 65 warning concerning acrylamide, but the company explains that acrylamide isn't added to the bread. It can form naturally during baking and becomes more relevant when foods are toasted or browned. That's an important distinction. You don't want fear-based food reporting. You want context. So we're not putting fronds here because one ingredient supposedly makes it poisonous. We're putting it here because if your goal is to find a better everyday bread, there are options with substantially more whole grains and far fewer formulation tricks. And those options are coming. Number 6. Sunbeam enriched bread. This is one of those loaves that has enormous nostalgia attached to it. The little girl on the package, the soft white slices, the childhood sandwiches. It's practically a piece of American food culture. But nostalgia doesn't change an ingredient label. The current Sunbeam formula starts with unbleached enriched flour, followed by water and either sugar or, depending on the specific formulation, high fructose corn syrup. After that come yeast, soybean oil, wheat gluten, salt, dough conditioners, soy flour, ammonium sulfate, calcium compounds, soy lecithin, and calcium propionate. That's a long way from the simple bread many people imagine they're buying. And one ingredient deserves special attention, not because you should panic when you see it, but because it illustrates how modern commercial bread is engineered. Some Sunbeam formulations list a group of dough conditioners that can include sodium stearoyl lactylate, calcium stearoyl lactylate, monoglycerides, datem, calcium peroxide, enzymes, and even azodicarbonamide. These ingredients serve technological purposes, improving dough handling, volume, texture, consistency, or shelf stability. The FDA's own educational material has historically described food additives by the functions they perform, including improving texture, appearance, stability, and processing. So the interesting question isn't, why would anyone put chemicals in bread? Everything is chemicals. The real question is how heavily the food has been engineered. Sunbeam also demonstrates why reading only the front of the package is a mistake. The front can tell you enriched, fresh, soft, or family bread, but the ingredient panel tells you what you're actually purchasing. If the first ingredient is enriched flour, you're not getting a predominantly whole grain loaf. If sugar or corn syrup is near the beginning, you're getting a sweetened formulation. And if the list continues with multiple conditioners and preservatives, you're looking at an industrially optimized product. There is absolutely nothing wrong with eating a slice occasionally. But if bread is a daily staple in your household, why settle for a formula built primarily around softness and shelf life when you can choose bread built around whole grains instead? Number 5. Sara Lee Classic White Bread. At number 5 is Sara Lee Classic White Bread. This is where the label starts getting more interesting, because Sara Lee has mastered something that food companies are extremely good at: making a product feel simple while the formulation is anything but simple. The classic white formula has historically centered on enriched wheat flour, water, sugar, yeast, vegetable oil, wheat gluten, salt, preservatives such as calcium propionate and sorbic acid, plus ingredients such as monoglycerides, datem, soy lecithin, and various nutritional fortifiers. In other words, the soft white slice in your sandwich may be the end product of a surprisingly sophisticated manufacturing process. Now, here's where I want you to be careful. Seeing a long ingredient list doesn't automatically mean dangerous. Vitamins such as folic acid, niacin, riboflavin, and iron are deliberately added to enriched flour for nutritional reasons. In fact, enrichment exists partly because refining removes nutrients and manufacturers add certain nutrients back. So if someone tells you that every ingredient with a scientific name is toxic, that's misinformation. The FDA regulates food additives, and food labels exist precisely so consumers can see what is in the product. Our concern is different. When a bread combines refined flour with added sugar, oil, conditioners, and preservatives, it's a very different nutritional proposition from a bread made primarily from whole grains, water, yeast, and salt. We're not simply ranking breads by how long the ingredient list is. We're also looking at what sits at the beginning of the list. Because ingredients are generally listed by weight, the first few ingredients tell an important story. The Whole Grains Council specifically recommends looking for whole grain terminology near the beginning of the ingredient list, rather than being fooled by words like multigrain or wheat. So if you see a beautiful brown loaf that says wheat on the front, flip it over. If enriched flour comes first, you may be looking at white bread wearing a healthier costume. And that trick becomes even more important with our next brand. Number 4, Nature's Own Honey Wheat. Number 4 is Nature's Own Honey Wheat, and this one is a perfect example of why you should never judge bread by its color. Honey wheat sounds wholesome. The package suggests wheat, honey, and something close to homemade bread. But older formulations listed unbleached enriched flour first, followed by water, whole wheat flour, honey, wheat gluten, sugar, and wheat bran. That means whole wheat was present, but it wasn't necessarily the dominant grain ingredient. The important point is that honey wheat is not the same thing as 100% whole wheat. Those words sound similar on a grocery shelf, but nutritionally they can represent very different products.
There is, however, a major update you need to know about. Nature's Own has introduced a newer honey wheat formulation in 2026, and current retailer information shows a substantially shorter ingredient list. Wheat flour, water, whole wheat flour, yeast, honey, sugar, wheat gluten, wheat bran, and smaller amounts of ingredients such as expeller-pressed canola oil, cultured wheat flour, flax meal, vinegar, enzymes, malted barley flour, and acerola cherry powder. The current version is also described as having no artificial colors, flavors, or preservatives. That's a meaningful improvement in ingredient simplicity, but refined wheat flour still appears before whole wheat flour.
And that makes Nature's Own a fascinating borderline case. Is it poison? Absolutely not. Is it the worst bread on the shelf? No. But if your goal is to maximize whole grain nutrition, this still isn't the loaf I would reach for first. The lesson is bigger than one brand. Food companies change formulations. The bread you bought last year may not have exactly the same ingredients today. That's why Unpoisoned America always recommends checking the actual package instead of relying on an old internet list. A shorter ingredient list is encouraging, but the first ingredient still matters. And now we're entering the breads that can look premium, rustic, and wholesome while hiding another problem: refined flour at the foundation.
Number 3, Pepperidge Farm Farmhouse Hearty White. This is one of the easiest breads to misunderstand because the packaging and marketing make it feel almost artisanal. The company talks about slow baking and careful craftsmanship. And to be fair, the ingredient list is not nearly as aggressive as some ultra-processed white breads. But look closely. Enriched wheat flour comes first, then water, sugar, and yeast. After that, soybean oil, salt, monoglycerides, calcium propionate, and sorbic acid for freshness, malted barley flour, whey, soy lecithin, datum, and wheat gluten. One slice provides 4 grams of total sugar and 230 milligrams of sodium. Notice what's missing from that first position: whole wheat flour. That's why the word farmhouse should not automatically trigger a health halo. In fact, the company itself says the bread contains no high-fructose corn syrup and no flavors or colors from artificial sources. That's a positive. But no HFCS doesn't mean no added sugar, and no artificial colors doesn't mean whole grain. The bread still contains 4 grams of added sugar per slice, according to the current nutrition panel, meaning 2 slices can contribute 8 grams before you've even added peanut butter, jam, deli meat, or anything else to your sandwich.
Here's the bigger lesson. A bread can be better than another bread without being the best bread available. That's the mistake people make when shopping. They compare one white loaf against another and decide that no HFCS or no artificial colors means healthy. But our standard is higher. We want the grain itself to do more of the nutritional work. The Whole Grains Council points out that words like multigrain, wheat, and 7-grain don't guarantee that the product is predominantly whole grain. What matters is the ingredient list and the actual whole grain content. So if you want a better everyday loaf, don't stop at the marketing claim. Keep reading.
Number 2, Wonder Classic White Bread. At number 2, we're talking about one of the most recognizable bread brands in America, Wonder Bread. And this is where the label gets really revealing. Current Wonder Classic White Bread formulations start with unbleached enriched flour, followed by water,
sugar or high fructose corn syrup, depending on the formulation, and yeast. Then comes soybean oil, wheat gluten, salt, and a long collection of dough conditioners and processing ingredients. Current retailer listings have included ingredients such as sodium stearoyl lactylate, monoglycerides, datum, calcium peroxide, calcium iodate, ethoxylated mono and diglycerides, enzymes, soy lecithin, and calcium propionate.
Now, here's the part that often gets sensationalized online. Some older or alternate Wonder formulations have listed azodicarbonamide among the possible dough conditioners. That ingredient has generated enormous controversy because it sounds alarming. But here's the responsible way to discuss it. Do not confuse regulatory status with a blanket health endorsement. And don't confuse a scary-sounding name with proof that a food is poisonous. Food additives are evaluated and regulated according to their intended uses. The FDA's Food Additive Framework exists to determine whether substances can be used in foods under specified conditions. So the strongest criticism of Wonder isn't the FDA allows poison. The stronger criticism is much simpler. You're buying a refined flour product engineered for softness, uniformity, and shelf stability when there are better ingredient profiles available.
And here's the irony. Independent taste testing in 2026 actually found Wonder Classic White to be extremely good at what it was designed to do. Soft, fluffy, mild, and structurally strong enough for sandwiches. That's not a contradiction. In fact, it's the point. The formulation works. The question is what you're optimizing for. If you're optimizing for the softest, nostalgic white bread, Wonder is incredibly successful. If you're optimizing for whole grains, fiber, and a simpler ingredient profile, the same formulation becomes much less impressive.
So Wonder takes number 2, not because one slice is going to suddenly make you sick. It takes number 2 because it represents the exact food environment consumers need to understand. A product can be legal, popular, affordable, delicious, and still not be the smartest everyday choice. The FDA can regulate ingredients. It cannot decide what your personal definition of good bread should be. And that's why our number 1 is going to be the bread I would be most cautious about choosing as a daily staple. Not because it's uniquely toxic, but because the nutritional trade-off is particularly easy to overlook.
Number 1. Sunbeam Family Enriched White Bread. Our number 1 avoid pick is Sunbeam's classic enriched white bread formulation. And yes, you'll notice something. Sunbeam appeared earlier in this countdown. That's because different Sunbeam products and formulations can vary by market and package size. But the classic enriched white version is exactly the kind of bread where the front of the bag can hide the bigger story. Current listings show enriched wheat flour as the foundation, followed by water, high fructose corn syrup, and then a collection of yeast, soybean oil, wheat gluten, dough conditioners, soy flour, ammonium sulfate, calcium compounds, soy lecithin, and calcium propionate. Think about what that means in practical terms. You're not starting with a whole grain. You're starting with refined, enriched wheat flour. You're adding a sweetener, you're adding oil, then you're using a series of processing aids and conditioners to achieve the soft, consistent texture Americans expect from packaged sandwich bread. Again, none of this means the FDA has declared Sunbeam unsafe. It means the product is optimized for the modern packaged bread system: softness, consistency, production efficiency, and shelf life. And if that's what you want, fine. But if you're standing in the bread aisle trying to choose the best everyday loaf for your family, you now have enough information to ask a better question. Ask yourself this: why am I buying bread in the first place? If it's simply to carry peanut butter from the jar to your mouth, almost any loaf will do. But bread can also be one of the easiest ways to increase whole grain intake. The Dietary Guidelines Framework has emphasized replacing refined grains with whole grains, and the Whole Grains Council notes that the whole grain should appear first, or immediately after water, when using ingredient placement as a practical clue. That one habit can dramatically simplify grocery shopping. Stop trying to decode every scientific name. Start by looking at the first grain ingredient. Now let's flip the entire conversation. We just went through 8 popular breads where refined flour, added sugar, oils, preservatives, or multiple processing ingredients made them less attractive as everyday staples. But you don't have to give up bread. In fact, 3 brands stand out because their formulations put whole or sprouted grains much closer to the center of the product. And the first one is especially interesting because its ingredient list looks almost nothing like the supermarket white breads we just discussed. Number 3. Safe Pick. Dave's Killer Bread, 21 whole grains and seeds. Now, don't misunderstand this choice. Dave's is not a 3-ingredient artisan loaf. It still contains organic cane sugar, wheat gluten, oat fiber, molasses, cultured wheat flour, vinegar, acerola cherry powder, and enzymes. So if your definition of clean is only flour, water, yeast, and salt, Dave's won't meet it. But look at the foundation. Organic whole wheat is first, followed by water, and then a mixture of whole grains and seeds, including flax, sunflower, quinoa, barley, oats, rye, millet, spelt, amaranth, sorghum, and others. And the nutrition reflects that difference. The current 21 whole grains and seeds loaf provides 22 grams of whole grains per serving, along with fiber and protein. That's a completely different nutritional starting point from a refined white loaf where enriched flour dominates the formula. Dave's also uses organic ingredients in this particular bread, which can be appealing to shoppers trying to reduce exposure to certain agricultural chemicals. Although organic does not automatically mean healthy, and conventional does not automatically mean dangerous. This is about the total formulation. Dave's earns a spot because the whole grains and seeds aren't merely decorations sprinkled on top of refined flour. They're central to the recipe. There's another important lesson here. Don't reject a bread simply because you see a long ingredient list. Dave's list is long because it actually contains a huge variety of grains and seeds. Compare that with a white bread, whose long list is dominated by flour, sugar, oils, conditioners, and preservatives. 2 ingredient lists can have the same number of lines while representing completely different foods. So our rule isn't short label equals good. Our rule is look at what the ingredients are doing. Is the complexity coming from nutritious whole foods or from engineering the texture and shelf life of a refined base? That distinction will help you shop far better than memorizing scary-sounding chemicals. Number 2 safe pick. Silver Hills The Big 16. Number 2 is Silver Hills Bakery's The Big 16. This is where the ingredient list becomes dramatically more grain-focused. The company lists organic sprouted grains and whole grains, including wheat, oats, millet, coruscant, barley, rye, buckwheat, corn, brown rice, amaranth, quinoa, sesame, and spelt. The current product provides 43 grams of whole grains per 2-slice serving, along with fiber and protein. The first ingredients are centered around organic sprouted whole grains and water, rather than enriched white flour and sugar. That's the pattern we're looking for.
Silver Hills also gives us another useful concept: sprouting. Sprouted bread isn't magically healthy just because the word sprouted appears on the package. But sprouting changes the grain before it becomes bread, and these products can preserve the bran and germ while providing whole grain nutrition. The Big 16 is also certified by the Whole Grains Council for its whole grain content. That gives consumers something much more meaningful than a vague front-of-package phrase. Instead of seeing multigrain and assuming you're getting a nutritious loaf, you can look for actual whole grain content and ingredient placement. And here's where the bread aisle becomes almost comical. On one side, you can have a loaf marketed as farmhouse, honey wheat, or premium white. On the other, you can have a loaf whose ingredient list openly starts with sprouted whole grains and water. Both are bread, both can make a sandwich, both can sit next to each other in the same grocery store. But nutritionally, they are not interchangeable. That's why the safest shopping strategy isn't to memorize every brand on this list. It's to understand the pattern. Whole grains near the beginning, minimal unnecessary sweetening, meaningful fiber, and ingredients that actually contribute something beyond softness, shelf life, or appearance. Number 1 safe pick. Food for Life Ezekiel 4.9. Sprouted whole grain bread.
This is the bread that changes the entire argument because you can almost read the ingredient list as a recipe. Organic sprouted wheat, filtered water, organic sprouted barley, organic sprouted millet, organic malted barley, organic sprouted lentils, organic sprouted soybeans, organic sprouted spelt, wheat gluten, yeast, sea salt. That's it for the original formulation. No refined white flour as the foundation, no added refined sugar, no conventional shelf-life preservatives sitting at the end of the list. And the company describes it as flourless, organic, sprouted, and preservative-free. The most interesting part is the combination of grains and legumes. Wheat, barley, millet, lentils, soybeans, and spelt bring different nutrients to the loaf, and Food for Life specifically designed the combination to provide a complete plant protein containing all 9 essential amino acids. The bread also retains the bran and germ of the grains because it isn't built around refined white flour. That doesn't mean Ezekiel bread is perfect for everyone. It contains wheat and soy, and its texture is much denser and less fluffy than the classic American white loaf. But if your priority is a whole food-oriented bread with a remarkably transparent ingredient list, it's hard to ignore.
And there is one final caveat. Safe is a word we use carefully. No bread is universally safe for every person. Someone with celiac disease, a wheat allergy, a soy allergy, or another dietary restriction has completely different requirements. Ezekiel contains wheat and soy. Silver Hills can contain wheat, seeds, and gluten. Dave's contains wheat and multiple seeds and grains. So these are safer choices from an ingredient quality and whole grain perspective, not guarantees for every medical or dietary situation. Always read the actual package, especially because formulations can change. The manufacturer itself advises consumers to check the physical label for the most accurate information.
So here's the trick I want you to remember the next time you're standing in the bread aisle. Don't start with the front of the package. Start with the ingredients. Number 1, look at the first grain. If it's whole wheat or another whole grain, that's a good sign. If it's enriched wheat flour, you're looking at refined flour. Number 2, look for added sugars. Honey, cane sugar, corn syrup, molasses, they can all contribute sweetness. Number 3, check fiber. A bread that looks brown isn't automatically high in whole grains. Number 4, don't panic over every scientific name. The FDA regulates food additives, and many ingredients have legitimate technological or nutritional functions. Your goal is not to eliminate every chemical name. Your goal is to choose a better overall formulation. And remember the biggest trap in the entire bread aisle. Healthy-sounding words are not the same thing as nutritional evidence. Wheat is not necessarily whole wheat. Multigrain doesn't automatically mean whole grain. Honey wheat doesn't mean 100% whole wheat. Farmhouse doesn't mean homemade. No high fructose corn syrup doesn't mean low sugar. And no artificial preservatives doesn't mean minimally processed. The ingredient list is where the marketing story ends and the food story begins. The Whole Grains Council specifically warns that words like wheat, multigrain, and bran alone don't establish that a bread is predominantly whole grain. Look for whole and look at where it appears.
And there's something else worth remembering. FDA approval is not a health halo. The FDA's job is food safety and regulation, not choosing your ideal diet. A food can legally contain an approved additive and still be a less nutritious choice than another food without that additive. Likewise, an ingredient with a complicated scientific name isn't automatically harmful. That's why we refuse to use the lazy approach of calling every additive poison. Real food investigation requires more nuance than that. If an ingredient is controversial, we explain what it does, what regulators say, and why it matters, or doesn't matter, in the context of the entire food. So if you remember nothing else from this video, remember these 11 names. The breads we'd be most cautious about as everyday staples were Arnold Country White, Franz Big Premium White, Sunbeam Enriched Bread, Sara Lee Classic White, Nature's Own Honey Wheat,
Pepperidge Farm Farmhouse Hardy White, and Wonder Classic White. Along with the classic Sunbeam-style enriched white formulation, we placed at number 1. Again, this is not a declaration that these brands are poisonous or illegal. It's a ranking based primarily on ingredient quality, refined versus whole grains, added sugars, processing ingredients, and how well the product fits the goal of choosing a more nutritious everyday bread.
And the 3 better choices we highlighted were Dave's Killer Bread 21 whole grains and seeds, Silver Hills The Big 16, and Food for Life Ezekiel 4:9. Dave's gives you organic whole wheat plus a huge variety of grains and seeds. Silver Hills goes even further into sprouted whole grains and provides substantial whole grain content per serving. And Ezekiel 4:9 keeps the ingredient list remarkably close to an actual grain and legume recipe. None is perfect for everyone. None should replace common sense or dietary advice. But from a label reading perspective, these are much closer to what we want from an everyday bread. The most surprising takeaway may be this: you don't actually need to memorize hundreds of additives to shop smarter. You don't need a chemistry degree. You don't even need to remember this entire countdown. You need one habit. Turn the bag around. Look at the first ingredient. Look for whole grains. Check the added sugar. Check the fiber. And then ask yourself why the remaining ingredients are there. Are they bringing nutrition, or are they mainly making the bread softer, sweeter, cheaper, more uniform, or longer lasting? Once you start asking that question, the bread aisle becomes much easier to navigate. And that's exactly why we made this video. Because the biggest problem with supermarket food isn't always that one ingredient is secretly toxic. Sometimes the problem is that marketing teaches us to stop reading before we reach the evidence. A loaf can look wholesome and still be built around refined flour. A loaf can say wheat without being predominantly whole wheat. A loaf can say natural while containing several processing aids. And a loaf can contain an ingredient with a complicated name that is completely legitimate and functional. The truth is almost always more interesting than the fear-based headline. So next time you're buying bread, don't ask, which package looks healthiest? Ask, what is this bread actually made from? That one question can take you from a soft white loaf built around refined flour and added sugar to a bread where whole grains, seeds, legumes, and fiber actually do the heavy lifting. And if you want more investigations like this, where we look past the front of the package and into what you're really buying, subscribe to Unpoisoned America. Because the label may be small, but what's hiding behind it can be a very big story. And before you leave, remember one final rule. Always check the label on the loaf in your hand. Formulations change, products vary by region, and online ingredient databases can become outdated. The manufacturers themselves recommend checking the actual package for the most current information. So use this video as a guide, not a substitute for reading the label. Because once you know what to look for, you don't need us standing beside you in the grocery aisle. You can do the investigation yourself. And that's the whole point of Unpoisoned America.